Hey everyone, here's a quick heads up. The Agile Online Summit is coming soon. You can get all the details at bit.ly/Agile Online Summit 24. Yes, it's all lowercase, all one word. That's bit.ly/Agile Online Summit 24. Stick with us till the end of the episode to know the dates, the tracks, and some surprises we have ready for you. But for now, let's dive into today's episode. Hello everybody, welcome to a very special bonus episode. For this special bonus episode, we have with us Jaques Smit. Hey Jaques, welcome to the show.
How's it going, Vasco? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. If you're interested in Jaques' take on the Scrum Master role and the key questions we ask every week, check out the episodes linked in the show notes. This is more of a focused discussion around the fact that Jaques is not only an Agile coach, he's also a book writer. He wrote a book recently, The Eye of Winter, I think it was.
That's right. Yeah.
And we're going to talk about what we can learn from book writing that we can also apply to Agile coaching and communication. So Jaques was born in Rundu, Namibia, and lives with his family in Wellington, New Zealand. As a games Agile coach and a master transformational coach, he writes about fantasy laced with positive psychology, aspiring to create compelling stories that touch the reader. And because he writes, and he is an Agile coach, and I'm very interested in the topic as well, the topic of writing, that is, not just Agile coaching. Let's start with the first question, Jaques. How have your experiences as a writer, as an author, inform your approach as an Agile coach?
There's two kind of like ways to look at that question in terms of the answer. And it's like, one is like, how was I able to explore ideas in Agile coaching through characters and like in the setting and the story that I created? And then there's the other side of like, what did I bring back, right? Like I went into the Narnia, explored some stories, and then I came back with new treasures that I could use to enrich the way that I engage with people. I think the first thing is this idea that like I write about fantasy settings, but specifically I try to bring a lot of what I do in my day-to-day into those things as well. So I wanted to explore ideas like leadership. What do small, nimble teams look like? When are they useful? Versus like when are big organizations used better? And what are the differences? How would you lead one versus the other in such a setting? And so my book actually has a lot of espionage as a kind of like underlying narrative. And I thought, like, what better space for small, nimble teams than espionage, right? Like, if something goes wrong, they have to react and respond to the chaos that
and something will go wrong because you're in enemy territory.
In fact, like as an author, my primary job is to make sure that the main character has the absolute worst time of his life.
That is
otherwise,
wonderful.
There's no interesting story. So many things are going to go wrong. And the other thing is like also dealing with some of the ideas of team induction and like having this new younger character with more of a kind of like seat of their pants approach, really arrogant, kind of like self-involved, think they know everything, having to be incorporated into this team of people that already know each other, have a tight dynamic that works, has a strong leader that they know and they trust. And when trust is such a fundamentally important component of a team, how does that work in an espionage team? You know, what happens? Like, does the leader, want to bring that deception home? Like, if he's lying to people out there, how does his team receive that? How do they expect him to behave? And so I explored a lot of those ideas in the pages. And then as I made sense of them through these characters, the key character, Lorenzo, who's the leader, embodies a lot of the key ideas around what good Agile leadership would look like. And I reflected a lot on, what does that look like? What does the journey look like? And then when I was speaking to leaders outside of my storytelling, I started to notice some things I was almost idealizing in the book, like the way that it's supposed to be versus the way that like reality often makes it really hard to be. Um, and
Can you give an
and
example
and
of that contrast between the way it's supposed to be versus what it is in reality?
yeah, so I think it's like the way it's supposed to be. Let's say a nimble team. So the team can work out conflicts amongst themselves. They are able to make decisions. They have just paradigms that help them to define how they should make a decision and move forward. And they've got the ability to give each other good feedback, so that they don't get stuck on a plateau, right? Um, the leader that's in that space is supposed to be able to adapt. If a new team member comes in, they should step all the way back and assume that this new team member needs to be onboarded, maybe with a more directive approach, teaching them how to resolve conflict, ensuring that's in place, teaching them how the decision making works, and then make sure that's in place as well. And most of the time, real leaders are so busy with so many people demanding things of them that they don't really have time to even think about like that they are supposed to do this right now and like respond to that appropriately. And in the book, the character almost became too good to be true because he was able to literally like dynamically adjust his behavior all the time. And I needed to resolve that because it made the character not feel real. That's not how real people work. We get stuck in a train of mind, like a mindset, and it can often catch us off guard, and then we have to kind of like pivot. And eventually I introduced like a way of essentially justifying that behavior. But it also gave me some conversations I could have with leaders who were dealing with this in their day to day. I had a conversation with a bunch of leaders who were, one of them was having a lot of trouble applying the appropriate leadership style or approach to the topics that arose in his day to day with his team. And I walked him through my experience, both what I was exploring in the book, but also how that kind of like became something I had to deal with, how I became aware of that stuff. And I said, well, the first step is knowing that you're doing it wrong, right? Knowing that there's a gap between what this ideal looks like, what you're trying to live up to, and what you're capable of doing. And initially, it's going to be like way after the fact. Maybe you have a bad feedback system, and like weeks later, you get someone that tells you, hey, you know that thing you did? It was not so good. Like this is the consequences. The second step of that awareness is that you start being able to kind of pick it up because you know what you're supposed to do, but you don't realize it until after the engagement. Directly after you go, oh, I did it wrong. I should have done it like this. And then after you've crossed over that barrier, you start being able to see yourself mess it up in real time. Like you can watch yourself live, mess it up, but you can't seem to stop yourself from doing it. And then you get to another stage of awareness where you can intervene, where you can stop yourself and say, okay, I'm making the mistake. And I find this is the most crucial step of it all, because if you can, at that stage, pause yourself and acknowledge, not just for yourself, but the other people in the room, hey, I'm doing this. I should be doing this. I'm going to reset right now and I'm going to try again. It's really intimidating. Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say, it's not just intimidating in my mind, at least. It requires so much deliberate practice, because being self-aware is difficult enough, but being self-aware in real time, it's, you know, a whole nother level. And that's a very interesting topic. So in the book, you developed this was it Lorenzo's character who is the leader and needs to perform this. And did you bring in this transformation? Like, because you said, you know, at the beginning, maybe the character was too perfect, not making any mistakes. How did you bring in that transformation?
So I won't spoil too much of Lorenzo's story because there's like a twist there, but because Birger, the main character, is trying to live up to this and he's being exposed to it, I brought it into his story, the way he's kind of like trying and failing and trying and failing. And he knows what he's supposed to do, but he's not quite getting it, and like becoming more self-aware over time. And the whole series, the book series, is essentially about Birger kind of coming through this journey of how to step into the role of a leader, how to let go of his selfishness and to embrace purpose. And that component of like becoming more self-aware, seeing himself mess up. The way I dealt with that is essentially he's got an inner cynic, which we all kind of have, right? You have a critic that sits on your shoulder and tells you all the things you're messing up. And he has active conversations with himself, with his own inner critic, where they debate things and like he eventually starts challenging the inner critic about like, you know, is this really a problem, or is it just like me being a bit cynical about things? But I use that as a mechanic for him to become self-aware about it over time.
So how do you decide what ideas to pursue in your writing? Because of course, this leadership topic is one that from an Agile coach perspective, I can totally imagine how fiction would be a great vehicle to explore these questions of leadership. But I'm sure when you start writing, you have lots of topics that come up and maybe you could take them on. So how do you make those decisions, which is in the end, and that's how I look at developing books, it is a little bit like developing products, right? You have many directions you can go in, but you need to prune certain directions and then focus, right? So how do you make those decisions?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. And I think coming from an Agile and a product background, that makes my life a lot easier compared to other writers, because I have a bit of a clearer understanding of how to do planning. In writing, you have people that call themselves planners and people that call themselves pantsers, right? Like flying by the seat of their pants. I am neither. I'm both, right? I believe in planning, but I don't believe sticking rigidly to a plan. So when I first set out to create the book, I have a few key ideas that I really want to impart. And my core vision of who I am as a person is to create a world where every single human being, especially people in creative industry, feel valuable, purposeful, and empowered. So if I'm writing a book, if I'm coaching, if I'm facilitating, if I'm scrum mastering, if I'm product owning, that needs to be there. So I know that at the very least, that vision needs to be upheld in the book. From there, I'm thinking, okay, so if I'm telling a story, the beginning is always the part I want to start with. So I want to start with setting an example of what greatness looks like. The second book, I'll deal with like overcoming the first step of leadership, how to deal with conflict well. The next step is then to kind of deal with good decision making. But I don't want to overwhelm the topic with too many different threads, right? So one book, one key idea. That's not to say that the book doesn't have more than one idea in it, but one key idea, one big idea. And for me, that was like essentially, what does onboarding look like from the person being onboarded's perspective? Why fiction is so great is that you can push ideas to the nth degree, right? You can really like, especially in a fantasy or science fiction world, you can create scenarios which are impossible in the real world. Like they are really pushing the idea to its limits. And when I'm thinking about that, I'm also thinking about what are the key kind of experiences I want to create. So experience pillars essentially of, as a reader, how do I want you to feel? What's the emotional state? And what does the emotional journey look like? So when I basically draw out a literal like arc, and I say, okay, in this stage, I want you to feel this emotion. In this stage, I want you to feel this emotion, and so on and so forth. And then the key thread of what I'm trying to achieve, and then how do I interleave other key ideas in order to be able to create highs and lows that drop you emotionally and pick you up emotionally, drop you emotionally and pick you up. And that's how it starts to come together, because then I have all the kind of like the threads laid out. I've got the key ideas laid out. How many chapters are going to be between each key ideas? Don't need to know that yet. So I started writing that out, fleshing out the skeleton, and I just start to write like from point to point to point to point with the least amount of effort I can. So just get it out there. And then I take that draft and I put it in front of my alpha readers, the first people that read it. And they didn't tell me if I'm really fundamentally missing the point on anything. And if there's like good feedback, a lot of great feedback came back on the alpha draft. Like, oh, there's not enough tension in this section, or this character feels way too, one-dimensional, or these characters seem like they just got along way too easy. And then I need to go in, I need to fix those big ideas. And once I've done that, then I start to go through the whole thread again. But this time I'm building it to the I'm adding more flesh to the bones. I'm starting to like really try to narrow down
So,
the
so
language and get
you're
it right.
basically kind of starting with what we would call a walking skeleton of a story, which already has all the key elements in it, but it's not fine-tuned or embellished. And then you gather feedback to, if I understood you correctly, you gather feedback to understand if the main thread captures the reader's interest and attention, and then what parts may need some work, what parts aren't clear, what lands, what doesn't land with the reader. Is that how you describe it?
Yeah, correct. And then once that lands, when the core story works, then you start fine tuning the lines. Like, is this the best way I could have said this sentence? And you start to really crunch up the quality. And then the question for you is, what's good enough, right? How far do you want to take this? And
well, before we go there,
well.
before we go there, I think it's important to realize. So let's take for a moment the idea that a book is a product, which in fact for the reader it is. But let's explore that feedback aspect, because you talked about collecting feedback, but you haven't yet shared how, what strategies, what tools do you use for that? Because the way you collect feedback is also very critical, right? Like, so you said Alpha Drive. I imagine you have a group of core interested readers who want to read your stories. What else do you use to kind of structure and foster that feedback cycle that you need as the author?
Yeah, when we can talk about this for hours. First off, you need to know who your readers are, right? Who's your target audience? And why should they like your book? Then you can pick your alpha crew, because your alpha readers, if I want to write a fantasy book and I go to a bunch of people that would never read fantasy and they're just reading it because they want to give me feedback, that'll give me feedback, but it won't give me feedback about like my readers, because they don't understand the tropes. They don't understand what's expected from the reader. So I might be just marginally better than the last person they encountered, but it's not nearly good enough for the kind of reader that I'm targeting. So building a really detailed persona that literally, like, you need to know your reader better than they know themselves. You need to know what will kind of tweak their interests and pull them into the story. Writing that all down and then having like some way of being able to hold on to that. Then go and test if that reader really exists. Go find someone that is like that reader and go talk to them. And when you get your one chapter, just take one chapter, put it in front of them and get their feedback. That isn't a huge time commitment from them. They don't have to commit reading an entire book. It's just a chapter, 1,000 words. And when you're asking your questions of them, you need to be very targeted with what you want to know. And you need to provide the questions to them upfront so that they have that in their mind when they're reading. And it should be open-ended questions, not directive questions, right? Like you don't want to influence their experience. So some basic ideas. This can be different if you're writing fiction versus nonfiction, but some core things that are going to be the same, because whether you're writing nonfiction or fiction, you're always going to be telling a story of some kind. So how did you feel when you were reading it? And which parts changed how you felt is the kind of question you want to be asking. Then in terms of the characters that were on display, because even if you're writing nonfiction, you're going to be telling it with a story that has a character, someone doing something, not being able to get it for some reason, and then figuring it out and getting it in the end, right? That's the story, basic story. Which characters did you connect with and why? Which characters did you not connect with and why? At any stage during the reading, did you feel like putting it down? This is really important to know, because people will often tell you what they think you want to hear. And so teasing out what's behind their behavior is another really important factor. I would recommend not just doing this in a survey, but actually sitting down with the person and asking them some deep questions. Like when they say, you know what, this was an okay character, I didn't really connect with them. You just go, oh yeah, great. So tell me more. What was behind that feeling that made you feel disconnected? And they explain that and you go, cool. And when you said the character seemed selfish, what specifically made you feel like that? and you unpack it with them, find out what they really think, and really thank them a lot for the feedback.
So basically
as well.
what you're saying is that you have a very specific approach to the user interview when it comes to writing a book. And as you were describing this, like in my mind, all was clicking. This is exactly what we do for products, right? We have a persona. We want them to be exposed to the product. We always start with an MVP, or at least we should if we don't. And then we want to have high bandwidth conversations with our initial users, because we need to understand if we captured what works and what doesn't work for them. Is that how you see it? And are you talking to your teams, the teams that you coach, also about these aspects?
Absolutely, yes. Both. So for me, value is creating an experience that the book in the book that someone is willing to. I'm not even going to say spend money on, right? Like, because that's a given. They have to want to spend their money to get the book. I don't want the person who's going to buy the book to put it on their shelf. I want them to be willing to give me their time to read the book. And that's a value for me as a writer. Your willingness to sacrifice 11 hours of your life because you think it's worth spending in my book. And that's how I speak to people in product. So I work a lot with game developers. And often in game development, like talking about the fact that people have to pay you money for it, it's almost like a sin. How dare you say that my game design must make people want to pay me money for it? It's like, okay, for one, we can't pay our bills if we don't get money. So someone has to be willing to buy your game. Otherwise, we're wasting our time. But let's think about it like this. Time or money. Time is the most valuable resource this person has. It is the thing that they have to be willing to give in order to be able to experience what you have created. And the way that they tell you that they believe in what you've made is that they're willing to give you some money to be able to give you some time. If they're willing to pay you to give you their time, you've made something amazing.
Actually, what you just said also reminds me that the definition of value we have can be critical, and it can lead us in the wrong way if we don't define it correctly. And your example is great, because you're talking about the money is just kind of the beginning of the relationship with the customer, right? Like, what we're really interested is in giving them an experience that allows them to feel pleasure, fulfillment, curiosity over a long period of time. So they need to be able, or they need to be willing rather, to give us their time, right? And I bet that also influences how you think about testing, because the first thing you need to do is find an idea that people want to spend time on, right? So how do you go about finding that idea? Like, what kind of experiments did you come up to find the idea for the book series you're writing?
Yeah, another really great question. Character sketches and story sketches is something that I do quite a lot. And what I did, like 14 years ago, I wrote a book, found no audience, no one wanted to read it. It was a complete failure, right? Now, part of that is I needed to go learn how to write well, but a big part of it is because I wrote a book I wanted to read, and I didn't care if anybody else wanted to read it, right? So I needed to also discover product thinking. And over the 14 years, I kept writing little sketches, little kind of like mini stories, and I would just put them on Wattpad or out in the wild, put them, like, let people know at work that they're there. And then what I would do is I would watch how people responded, what they were interested in, what they liked. And when I saw someone ask me for more, when they said, hey, this was really cool, like, how do I get the next chapter? That's when I was like, I found it. Now I found it. I have something someone wants. And I remember this very distinctly. It was like, I wrote the one chapter, I gave it to a bunch of different people. And one person came back to me and said, dude, that I can see that we read the same kind of books. That was so much fun to read. Can I have another chapter? And I was like, yeah, sure. Here's another chapter. The person read it and they were like, this is awesome. Like, can I have another one?
This is so cool, okay, because this is exactly like lean startup, when you go from 0 to 1, right? Like, you need to find the evidence that you are on track. And that's the 0 to 1 problem, where the way I define it is, a complete random stranger tells you that they want your product. They're not related to you. You don't know them, but they tell you, whether physically, like giving you money or giving their email or asking you for the second chapter, or through some other means. And I think that this illustrates that aspect so clearly. Very often we want to create products, and in your case, books, that we want to go from zero to complete and then get a large audience. But in fact, that's not how you get the audience. That's not how you get the customers, right? You get one first that proves you're on the right direction, in the right direction, and then you need to develop that further, right?
Absolutely. And then you need to focus on those early adopters as well. You really serve them, understand what it is that they love, and give them more and more of it. Because like you say, you're not going to suddenly luck into the large majority. That's not how this works. You got to get those early adopters so jazzed up about the great thing that you did for them, that they loved it so much that they're willing to advocate for your book in the bigger public.
Now, another aspect of storytelling, and this is something we've talked about quite a lot here on the podcast, is this idea that the way we work, like coaches and scrum masters, we work through people, right? We don't work through things. It's not computers or code that does the things that we need to do. It's other people, right? Like we work through this medium we call people. And as an author, that is your core element, right? These are fictional people, but they are people nonetheless. They're just in a fictitious setting, and they are fictitious characters. But that leads me to the other thing, which is, because you as an author also work through people, you have learned quite a lot of lessons about how to work through, for example, change. Change is a big topic for us, right? And you've already mentioned that your character goes through change, which is one of the main aspects of the hero story format. So how do you use what you've learned from writing a book in your own storytelling for change leadership?
Yeah, so first off, I actually put a real professional coach in the world. It's fantasy. So I created a way for modern positive psychology to exist in the world. And I put an actual professional coach that helps our protagonist along his journey. Because if I'm going to put him through the worst time of his life, I might as well put him physically back together, but also psychologically back together, right? It's just fair. And so I actually created coaching conversations on the go. And I have this character who's actively, essentially the team coach, and works with the leader and works with the team members to identify the needs and then react and respond and to knit the team together. And for the protagonist, the way that I use the language, like I used clean language from Dave Grove. I used creating gain frame, focusing on what we get rather than what we're losing. And Renata, the character who's doing this, she takes this character who, every time he's hitting one of these brick walls, before his awareness is starting to kind of like expand and him being able to overcome these challenges, and she helps him to see himself thinking so that he can start to unpick it and start to realize how to change, how to create the future that he wants to create, and how he can be a proactive part of that rather than just being a slave of whatever's happening. And I'm using a lot of the experiences that I have outside of in coaching and professional coaching. And I gave the book, just a section of that. I was talking to a therapist, a psychologist, and they were like, so how did you do this? And I gave the section to them because I know exactly where it is. And I showed them, here it is, like this is the conversation. And they read through it and they were like, wow, that's just what change looks like. That's what it looks like when someone has a realization. And I was quite happy with that response because that's obviously what I was going for. But I was drawing directly on my hundreds of thousands, well, it's like thousands of hours now of coaching experience, speaking to clients, seeing change happen, seeing the kinds of thinking that leads up to it and ultimately results in it. And I think it's maybe... Yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say that, based on that, I can totally see why it's important for us Scrum Masters and coaches to look for fiction that depicts situations that we are in, and to be able to explore that in a safe space, because obviously, the privacy of our mind is usually, not for everybody, but for most people, it is a safe space, right? Like we don't chastise ourselves or criticize ourselves to depression. Some do, but hopefully we are not that kind of people. Those people would need help, of course. How do you go through that process? Because I mean, for me, it is quite clear that fiction is an excellent space to find specific topics and develop them further and understand how we act in real life. But how do you find these topics? Like, do you have like your coaching, journal, and then you write problems that are kind of thorny and you want to explore in fiction? How do you make that decision?
Yeah. So I think there's a two-way thing here. There's how do I create little stories that I can give people that help them to make sense of things? And then how do I identify real life stories that I want to explore further? I think often for me, it comes from little sparks of inspiration. Like, oh, I was reading something by Adam Grant the other day. I think it was Think Again. And the idea of scientific thinking being the toolkit that you're bringing is something I've thought about many times, and it's something I really believe in. Like when you're dealt a complex situation, you must always be using complex thinking, and that's the scientific method, thinking like a scientist in order to deal with it. And that thing would kind of like trigger like, okay, so if we were to say scientific thinking like is the way that we want to approach complex situations, what does that look like in a high intensity, high action, like crazy world? Lots of things are happening all the time, which is actually the reality we face in most of our real life, right? Like a Scrum team doesn't just have infinite time to make all the decisions the right way. Often you're time bound and you've got pressure, you've got stakeholders with expectations. And it's not always that easy to make the right decision the right way. So exploring that idea just made it onto my board. And I have a big Miro board, huge one, that has all my ideas like all over the place. And then I start to kind of like, when I plan out, I draw my arc and I start laying out my chapters. I start to pick the constellation, like what are the stars that are going to be featuring here? How am I going to represent this idea? What character do I need in order to be able to do this justice? And then to bring it back as well, like how do I give this to a leader who's like struggling with a real situation, that they can make sense of that situation and retell the story to someone else? It's one of the things I love about Adam Grant's work, is it's so easy to take one of his little stories and tell it to someone else as a parable, which then allows them to use that in their day-to-day.
But I think that the way you've described it kind of illustrates how we can use fiction in order to do our work. Now, this can be through writing like you do, but also through reading. So if you were to talk to Scrum Masters and Agile coaches who happen to like fiction, what are the reasons they should read The Eye of the Winter? How does that apply not only to their satisfaction and entertainment, but also to their growth as coaches and Scrum Masters?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is there's a good reason why you should read fantasy and science fiction anyway. There's a mounting kind of like evidence that the escapism that comes from being able to go, and then this is not true for everyone, just like your previous like thing. Some people, the way your brain is wired, you need additional support in order to be able to deal with stuff. But if you're dealing with normal levels of stress, normal levels of anxiety that we all deal with, reading something like fantasy or science fiction, because it allows you to look at issues from a distance, as a distant observer, there's no way The Eye of Winter can be your reality, right? There's absolutely no way. It is so far removed from your day-to-day that you can look at it and see similarities. You can see people going through issues that you relate with, but you can clearly see it's not you. And that gives you this break, this stress holiday. Being able to essentially just put your worries on pause for a while, allow your brain to recuperate. And then when you go back, you can re-pick up those things, but with a clearer mind. The second part of it is, I play with some dynamics there that I hope everyone has seen in teams somewhere. And being able to like go and notice those playing off in a different environment and just asking yourself the question, this is the way this author dealt with it. Would I have dealt with it that way? What would I have done if I was in that situation and had to deal with that? If I had to create myself a character and throw myself into this world and react to these people, be their scrum master, what would I do? And would I survive? Probably not. Let's be honest.
Only the chosen survive, and only the author can choose them, right?
Exactly. And very few people survive.
So is The Eye of Winter the first or the nth book on the series?
It is the first, and I will continue to work on the series as long as people are enjoying it. And if they don't, I'll finish it up and I'll close off the series
and move on, of course. Exactly. So The Eye of Winter is the first book of the series, features a coach and a struggling apprentice who will benefit from the coach's help and learn how to become a leader. That sounds like many of us out there, right there. So for those that enjoy fantasy and sci-fi, where should they get The Eye of Winter, Jaques?
The Eye of Winter is available at most bookstores. The Amazon store is awesome. I really like the version that they've got, especially the hardcover is really nice. But both the versions there are pretty solid. The ebook's only available on Amazon, and you can get it on Amazon Kindle Unlimited if you have a subscription. Just search for The Eye of Winter or Positive Fantasy, which is a movement I'm attempting to create.
There you go. Positive fantasy. Right. The Eye of Winter is the book. Jaques Smit is the author. Jaques, thank you very much for sharing all of these very interesting ideas, of course, but also all of your knowledge and experience in this bonus episode. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Pasco. Appreciate it a lot.
Hi there, Agile friends. Thank you for sticking around. So, as I was saying at the beginning of the show, on October 22nd this year, we will have the first day of the Agile Online Summit 2024. The summit will take place from October 22nd to 24th, so make sure you book your calendars as there will be loads of sessions for you to attend, including live QAs with the speakers, networking sessions, and more. This year, we're also organizing regular networking events online so that you get to talk and meet your peers before the summit even starts. So if you want to know more, check them out at bit.ly/Agile Online Summit 24. That's all one word, all lowercase. That's bit.ly/Agile Online Summit 24. You can sign up for a free ticket and get notified when those warm-up events will be organized, so stay tuned. Now, regarding the summit, our opening keynote will be Marshall Goldsmith's exposition of a project he's been working on for a while. That's marshallgoldsmith.ai. And Marshall is an author and also a leadership coach who sold over 3 million books worldwide and has been considered twice #1 leadership thinker in the world by Thinker 50. And you definitely don't want to miss that. If you want to know more about the tracks, here they are. We will have 4 tracks. The first track is Shift from Product to People. In this track, we will explore what we call the third wave of Agile adoption, exploring psychological safety, coaching techniques, and more to unlock your team's potential. In this track, you can learn to foster trust, encourage innovation, and build high-performing teams. Transform your approach and the future of Agile to be much more people-centric. The second track we have for you is value-centric product development. In this track, we will learn how to master product management and ownership by focusing on value. We will learn to identify, validate, and deliver what customers truly need, and dive into customer-centric approaches, experimentation techniques, and continuous market validation ideas. We have to accept that if Agile is to succeed, we have to become value-centric, and that's what we explore in this track. The next track is titled Agile Coaching Masterclass. We want to help take your coaching to the next level and transform team performance. Develop key Agile coaching skills, emphasizing people-centric and value-centric approaches in line with the previous tracks. And we will help you learn how to guide teams towards value focus and effectiveness. In this track, we want to help you unlock the potential of the individuals and the organizations you will be working with. After all, the future of Agile is coaching-centric. And finally, the last track, and definitely not the least, is all about the future of Agile. Explore the trends shaping Agile's evolution. The previous 3 tracks do that as well. Discover real-world success stories from innovative companies pushing the boundaries of what's possible today, and learn how practitioners are evolving Agile practices, gain insights in how to revolutionize your own approach. After all, the future of Agile is here, so let's explore it. You will also have the opportunity to network with your peers, so get your ticket and join our Slack at bit.ly/Agile Online Summit. That's all lowercase, all one word, bit.ly/Agile Online Summit 24. As always, we have free tickets and the VIP tickets, so check them out. It will all be available at bit.ly/Agile Online Summit 24. I'll see you on the conference floor.